Hello retro gaming friends and welcome to another video where I mod something. Today's victim is this Sega Game Gear and the mod is to give it video out because as we know the Sega Game Gear had a less than stellar screen. So with this mod I can output composite video to a TV and this also enables me to properly capture the footage which I can then use in reviews. So before I take you through the process, I'll just show you the finished product first, and here you can see the composite cable plugging into the top. That just plugs into the TV, and really that's it. In use, this mod is very simple. Okay, heading back in time, here is the Game Gear that I will be performing the mod on. Now, this Game Gear is perfectly working. I have previously replaced all the capacitors in it, so that won't be an issue, and that is another major problem with Game Gears. However, the screen is a bit screwed up. See all those lines there? I have made previous videos about this Game Gear and trying to fix it, so I will link those if you want to see this Game Gear's story. But basically, it's no good. It works, but that screen is bunk. And I have another Game Gear that's fine, all the caps are replaced in that as well, and that is my legit, untouched Game Gear, except for the capacitors of course, but that is necessary in this day and age. So I thought this guy would be perfect to mod, since I'm not going to play a Game Gear with lines across the screen. So here's the mod chip itself, the GGTV. This was developed by a guy named Tim Worthington, otherwise known as eTim, and he's Australian, just like me. So these were developed in Australia and shipped locally, but he does ship all over the world. And I should probably point out that this video isn't sponsored or any way, it's not affiliated with eTim, he doesn't know who I am, probably. I have paid for this because I just really wanted to mod my Game Gear. But this is revision 2.3, I believe, but he's been making these for quite a few years now, as far as I can tell. Also sent with the GGTV is this RGB output video connector. Should be noted that the GGTV is totally capable of outputting RGB. However, since my RGB setup is it's a bit on the piss at the moment to be realistic, I will just be modding composite today. But I will be keeping these plugs. I could possibly add in RGB later on if I would like to. And it also comes with this little breakout board just to make soldering easier. Also in the packaging were these two pieces of wire, I didn't use those. And here is the little composite output video jack that I will be using. This didn't come with the GGTV, but composite is very much supported, and these output jacks are very easy to find. They can be bought in most electronic stores, usually for under $1. The only other two materials that were required for this mod was wire, so I was just using this standard ribbon cable that you can buy just about in any electronic shop, usually costs less than $2 a meter. There is a lot of wiring for this, so be prepared for that. I also just used this double-sided sticky tape. This is solely just to stick the GGTV inside of the Game Gear and just make sure it doesn't move around and undo any wires or anything like that. You could also use hot glue, but I opted to go for something that was a little less permanent. The double-sided tape has suited me well so far. Okay, let's get cracking. Pulling apart the Game Gear is really quite simple. There is only 6 Phillip head screws plus a game bit screw on the top. The game bit screw obviously needs a special screwdriver, but they can be found online quite cheaply. The other 6 screws are just Phillip heads. Keep in mind that 2 of those are in the battery compartments. For some reason, my Game Gear only has 4 screws. I'm not sure what happened to the other 2. I've had this Game Gear for quite a few years. But yeah, that's why you can only see me removing 4. Once those screws are out, there are 3 other connectors joining the 2 halves of the Game Gear. These simply pull out. There's no latches or anything like that. Just be careful with the wires. They can be a little bit fragile. So you can put aside the top half of the Game Gear for now. We will not need it for this mod. The GGTV is designed to fit very snugly on the bottom bit of the Game Gear, just under the cartridge slot and the screen there. I will be putting the composite output on the top there, just because it seems like a logical place. You've got the audio jack on one side, the power jack on the other. Yeah, that's why I decided to put it there. No mysteries at all. So straight up I decided to drill the hole for the composite output, frankly, because it was the biggest part of the mod that I was dreading. But it was really quite simple. There weren't really any dramas at all. What I did is I just used 2 different bits, one quite a bit smaller than the other. I drilled in this smaller hole first, which was probably about, 4 or 5 mils, even less than that, probably like 2.5. And then I got the big guy, the 6.5mm drill bit, and using that small drill hole as a guide, I put in the hole that would be the funnel hole. Unfortunately, the composite output was just a slightly bit too small. It wasn't like wriggling around or anything, but this would cause me problems later on. But we don't need to worry about that now. However, I did drill the hole maybe about 2 mils lower than I should have. When I plugged the output in there, the actual connection tab would hit up against the back shield of the Game Gear's screen. So this is very just unfortunate luck more than anything. So I decided for the meantime just to put down a bit of electrical tape just so the two wouldn't be touching. And one test fit later with a cable, it's all looking pretty good. So let's carry on to the soldering. So as promised, I whacked some pieces of double-sided tape onto the GGTV, stuck it into the Game Gear, and then started tinning up the outputs and inputs. So with the GGTV, there is contacts on the left and contacts on the right. The left are output tabs and the right are input tabs. So basically all the wires coming off the circuit board go into the right, and then the left is used for all the video out connections. So before I forget, I should probably mention that there are a couple of different revisions of Game Gears out there, and depending on what you have, the GGTV will need to be soldered in a couple of different ways. So I have a dual ASIC model of the Game Gear, and that solders in with the Game Gear using this diagram. However, there is also a single ASICs Game Gear, and the GGTV solders in using this diagram. So if you do this yourself, just make sure you open up the Game Gear and just check what you have before you buy the GGTV. And another reason to do that is because there is a later model of the Game Gear that isn't compatible with the GGTV for whatever reason. It's on ETM's website, but it is the Game Gear with the ASICs chip that is labeled 315-5682. So yeah, just check that before you start, I guess. So in this video, I'm not really going to show you me soldering every single connection. I find that a bit fruitless, and honestly, I would find that quite boring to watch. But I did sort of film me doing a couple of connections, and my head got in the way anyway, so yeah, whatever. Keep in mind that this isn't the easiest soldering project ever. Soldering from the GGTV is easy, but on the input side, a lot of those go to like a single side of an SMD, of an SMD resistor, a capacitor, or something like that. It's not like overly complicated, and the information that Tim gives is very easy to follow. But it was pretty tricky in some instances, especially in one particular connection, which I will get to in a second. But yeah, just make sure you keep your tip clean as you do it. It's kind of funny me looking inside of this Game Gear again and looking at my capacitor replacements. The connections are really dirty. I didn't really use flux or anything back then, so I'm really lucky that those capacitors have any connection at all. All these ones look freaking mint, but yeah, just make sure you use flux. And just make sure you clean your soldering iron. This has been a little bit of a weird little tangent, but yeah, good practice for soldering. All the outputs on the left are outputs except for one. This is a tab labeled enable with an exclamation mark at the start for some reason. I guess that means not enable. Yeah, I remember programming. Basically, that must be connected to ground for the board to operate properly. This is good because you can basically connect that up to a switch and then turn the GGTV on and off if you do sometimes just not want it to output video for whatever reason. The other main thing to keep in mind is the one labeled pixel clock. That wire must be kept as far away from the other wires as possible. If it's in proximity to the other wires, it can cause a bit of interference. As you can see here, I haven't really done that stellar of a job of keeping it away from the other wires. I've sort of just done a big loop and it goes up there. I should also note that it solders in between the two resistors there. I think they're resistors. All right, time for the first big test. Let's plug it in and see what happens. Oh, so the good news is it's outputting video, but sadly, basically all the colors are inverted. So obviously I went through the general troubleshooting. Here's me trying it out on a different TV, and as you can see, it does exactly the same. I also tested it on my CRT with the same results. I tried that game in the other Game Gear and it worked fine there. And I tried another game in this Game Gear and basically the same thing happened. So something is at fault somewhere. So after a bit of troubleshooting, mostly using the continuity mode on my multimeter, I tracked down the problem to the H-Sync output, which I believe stands for horizontal sync, and that would make sense since the colors are all inverted. Now, this is a super hard solder connection, maybe not for some, but it definitely was for me. This wire has to be soldered onto one of the pins of this IC, and obviously the pin is, the thickness of a hair, so it's very hard to solder that wire to that connection and then not have the connection bridge onto the other pins either side of that one. So it took a bit of desoldering and resoldering and checking with the multimeter. Sometimes it got better, sometimes it got worse. It probably took me about 4 attempts, I think. I think at one stage I had the connection over 4 different pins. So yeah, it was a bit comical really. But finally, with my head in the way, I might add, I finally did the continuity test and only got it on the 1 pin. And what do you know, I plugged it back in and look at that, it works perfectly. So with the mod now working, it was just time now for a bit of cleanup. I had to desolder and resolder in that connection there just because I had that loose for testing purposes. Since it was just like a little bit too low and that the hole was a little bit too big, it turned into a big hassle to secure the nut on it so it would actually stay in place. And it actually is still a little bit loose, but it's fine. It still works. It's not hugely detrimental, but if I was to do this again, I'll definitely try and drill that hole just a little bit higher and a little bit smaller. The other major problem was the fact that the case couldn't close now because of that connector. There was a clip that went straight in there, and obviously the clip can't go in there because the connector's now there. So originally I was just going to cut this off, and for some reason my side cutters could just not penetrate that metal at all. So I ended up just bending it out of shape, and with that the case went on fine. The only other thing I had to take note of was that the wires weren't over any screw holes. But once everything was routed around, I did that mostly while soldering the wires anyway, the case closed with no problems whatsoever. The GGTV is so flat, there's just nothing protruding out at all. And here is the finished product. I think that output there looks pretty nice where it is, and I think eventually if I do decide to put in the RGB connector, they will look pretty awesome side by side. And it should totally be noted that with the GGTV installed, the screen still works. So obviously I have no use for mine because it's an absolute crap heap. But if your GGTV is still in a working order otherwise, and sometimes you don't feel like plugging it into a TV, there's no reason that you still just can't use it as a traditional Game Gear. So now here's the part that you've probably been waiting for. Let's look at some game footage. Now, it plugs into the TV and displays the image fine, no problems. However, there is a border and there is apparently no way around that. It's not really a huge issue when you consider how small the screen was to begin with. And one thing I found funny was how crisp the Game Gear actually outputs video. The screen on it is absolute balls. It's blurry, it's hard to read. But when you're looking at the output on the screen, I'm actually quite happy with the graphics. Sometimes there is a little bit of static along the bottom, however that is in the border. So yeah, it doesn't really affect the actual gameplay itself. I threw a bunch of different games at it and all of them worked. I'm just showing you a selection here and the footage therein. But yeah, it just seems to be hijacking the video out signal, so there's nothing weird going on. The Game Gear will work just as intended. The only hiccup I ran into is that a bunch of Ninja Gaiden footage didn't record for some reason. The video file is completely corrupt. However, I'm assuming that this is actually to do with my Elgato for some reason, because it only did it with this clip, it didn't do it with anything else, and the game was playing fine through the TV at the time. So I don't know what happened there, but I thought I would note it anyway. But yeah, that is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I quite enjoyed this, and yeah, the result of this will be proper Game Gear reviews. I will no longer have to use emulation. I can actually use my actual game cartridges and actually play it on my Game Gear. Who would have known? But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.